Not all skills are created equal. The game of SpeedDuels is home to over 100 different skills, some meta warping while others aren't worth a second look. With so many skills not being given the light of day, I wanted to see if I was able to make a deck for every single skill currently in the game. A monumental task to be sure, but one I'm willing to tackle head on. So, before we dive in, I do have a couple premises I want to get out of the way from the start. First, in this series, I want to take the time to break down each skill and explain exactly what it's trying to accomplish, its weaknesses, and its strengths. Secondly, each of the decks I'll be constructing will be built in a way that should and could snag you a top at a local, but let's face it, you're probably not going to be able to take this deck to top a major event. And finally, I'll be trying to create these decks to be as relatively budget friendly as possible. This means that I'll be trying to avoid adding cards that have exorbitant prices in the secondary market, but I'll be sure to mention them nevertheless. Without that established, let's do this. For the first episode of the series, I'll be covering one of my personal favorite bad skills, that being Ancient Ruler Rises, a skill for the character Abydos. So first off, the activation requirement for this skill is you just flip it over at the beginning of the duel. Simple enough. What exactly does this skill do, however? So let's go ahead and read it together. The skill reads, once per turn, you can send one level 2 zombie monster from your deck to the graveyard, and place one of the first sarcophagus, second sarcophagus, or third sarcophagus from your deck, graveyard, or that is banished, face up in your spell and trap card zone. This is treated as being placed by the effect of this first sarcophagus. Alright, so that's the first part of the effect, and there's an additional effect to tack onto this. Each spirit of the Pharaoh you control gains attack equal to the number of Pharaoh Servant and Pharaonic Protectors on your field and or graveyard times 900. Alright, so let's go ahead and discuss what the skill is trying to accomplish, all the pros and the cons the skill has, and then we'll wrap things up with a deck profile. Alright then, what's the skill trying to accomplish? The skill overall is super simple in the sense that it's trying to make a previously unplayable bad series of cards actually functional. Kinda. More on that in a second. The ultimate goal of this deck is to summon Spirit of the Pharaoh, who has the ability to special summon a ton of vanilla monsters from your grave, which has some level of utility. And that's pretty much all the card does. Luckily, the skill does also give the aforementioned monster an additional effect, allowing it to get pretty beefy, which gives your deck a really reliable beater. However, you do have to play a lot of vanilla monsters in order to make that possible. As I said, there's not all that much complexity behind this skill and what the deck is trying to accomplish. But now that we know the skill and what it does, let's discuss what the skill does right and the not so good. Let's begin with the good. The effect to send a zombie to the graveyard is an actual generic effect that does not force you to send the vanillas the deck plays or is forced to play. The leniency behind this skill allows you to be very creative with the deck builds you construct, and adds a certain level of consistency to the deck, which is always a bonus, since you're allowed to Foolish Burial whatever monster that's level 2 or lower, well, not whatever monster, but whatever zombie monster you like that's level 2 or lower, to the graveyard, which is awesome. Foolish Burial is a phenomenal card, there's a reason why it's on the ban list. And finally, as I said, the end goal of this deck is to summon an enormous monster that can easily help you close out games. But besides those two pros, there's really nothing else but cons with this skill. So let's go ahead and cover those. What's wrong with this skill that keeps it from being actually viable? Well, let's begin by talking about the cards that we need to play. Those being the servants, the sarcophagus, and finally, the boss monster. Somehow this deck managed to be comprised of nothing but bricks. I'm being serious here. If you ever played this deck, you kinda just hate seeing any part of the engine. You don't want to see the boss monster at any point, you really don't want to see the sarcophagus at any point, and honestly, with the vanilla monsters the deck plays, they're not all that great either. They're all, like, I believe if I remember correctly, 900 attack level 2 vanilla monsters. None of the deck itself or the important cards of the deck are great to see in your opening hand. That's pretty much a huge red flag regarding this skill. Also, the deck is super prone to interruptions. Any form of backrow destruction kind of just forces you to restart the whole process of summoning your boss monster, which makes this deck super fragile. And finally, because you need all the 3 sarcophagi face up on the field in order to summon your boss monster, this makes playing back row a bit awkward in this deck. I know it sounds like I'm being really rough and pretty mean to this deck, but as I said at the beginning, this is one of my personal favorite skills and a deck that I personally have a ton of fun playing whenever I'm, having duels casually. I'm just able to acknowledge all the flaws this deck has. But now that we're more familiar with this deck, all the pros, all the cons, and etc., let's do the deck profile now. Alright, so here we are at the deck profile, and as you can see, I opted to go with a vampire blend for this deck. I think that the vampire engine is a phenomenal engine for this deck, specifically because vampires are very consistent, very strong, and they're just kind of annoying for your opponent to deal with. Overall, I think this is a really good option if you wanted to play this deck, but don't worry. I actually have 2 different deck profiles for today's video, just so you can see just how much I like playing this deck. I have 2 different versions I play. So this one's gonna, I guess, be the more competitive side, I suppose, because you're using a good deck and blending it with a bad deck, but enough about that. So, of course, we are playing the skill, duh. We need the skill in order to make the deck work. And after that, you know what? I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin by going ahead and covering all the Sarcophagy cards first, and then move on to the Vampire Engine, and after that, we'll just cover all the tech choices, I suppose. So give me 1 second. Okay, there we go. So first off, we're going to be playing the first, the second, and the third Sarcophagi. If you've never read these cards, you're not missing out. So let's go ahead and read the first Sarcophagi, which is the only relevant one here. So this card reads, once per turn during your opponent's end phase, your opponent, keep in mind, plays the second Sarcophagi, or after that, the third Sarcophagi from your hand and or deck in your spell and trap card zone face up. Then, if you control the first Sarcophagi, the second Sarcophagi, and the third Sarcophagi, send all of them to the graveyard, and if you do, special summon 1 Spirit of the Pharaoh from your hand or deck. If any of these cards, including this one, leaves the field, send all of them you control to the graveyard, including this card. So, remember when I said at the beginning of the video how this deck is super fragile? Yeah, this is what I mean. Even if you have all 3 of them face up during your opponent's turn and they decide to like Cosmic one away or a double Cyclone or whatever, you name it, any type of back removal. If they destroy any of them, that's it, they all go to the graveyard together, which is really rough. Also, because this card is super slow, it only triggers during the end phase of your opponent's turn, not any player's turn, your opponent specifically. This makes it super prone for disruption, so do keep that in mind whenever you play this deck. Alright, moving on. We have 2 copies of Pharaoh Servant. As you can see, I opted not to play the other vanilla monster, which is, I forget actually, my bad. So I opted to play only Pharaoh Servant just because I like the design of it better. That's literally the only reason. There's 0 reason as to why I'm playing this one. Play 2 of whichever one you like. I think Pharaoh Servant looks personally better. So that's the reason for this. Also, you could, if you wanted to, up the number of Pharaoh Servants you play, but I feel like the least I play, the more consistent the deck becomes and the less likely I am to open one of these guys. 2 felt fine, and after a lot of playtesting, I didn't miss a 3rd one, but up to you. After that, we have Spirit of the Pharaoh, which is the whole point of this deck. Let's go ahead and read this guy. Cannot be normal summoned or set. Must be special summoned by the effect of the first Sarcophagus. When this card is special summoned, you can target up to 4 level 2 or lower zombie normal monsters in your graveyard to special summon those targets. So, as we can see, this card is only okay. It's not really worth the trouble of summoning it, but it is a cool boss monster overall. As I said, most of the utility comes from being able to summon the vanillas. Doesn't really come up, at least not in this variant of the deck. And honestly, it's not that bad because you could just use the summon them to the field as tribute fodder for your vampire cards. So there's that. But overall, this is what we're trying to summon. Alright, now that we've covered all the bad cards, let's go ahead and move on to the good cards. That being the vampires. So we're going to be playing 1 copy of Vampire's Curse. I really like Vampire's Curse. He's an annoying big monster your opponent has to deal with. If they destroy him by battle, he comes back and gains 500 attack points, given that you pay 500 to special summon him, which is, it can get a little rough depending on where you are in the duel, but overall I think he's really good. After that, we have 2 copies of Vampire Lord. I think overall Vampire Lord is a better version of Vampire's Curse, even though Vampire's Curse can get bigger. Because there's so much card destruction effects in the format, I figured that Vampire's Lord is a lot better. Also, it's not super easy to run over by your opponent because it does have 2,000 attack points, which is nothing to scoff at. It's a great card overall. Also, I don't mind having it in the graveyard because you can always just special summon it off Vampire's Desire. So that's, it's not a bad card to have in your hand. I'll just say that. After that, we're going to be moving on to the smaller vampires. We have one copy of Vampire Sorceress. Sorceress is great. I don't think you need more than one of her, just because she isn't as proactive as the other cards. So first, what does she do? She has the effect that if this card in your possession is sent to the graveyard by your opponent's card, that being battle or card effect, you can add one dark vampire monster or one vampire spell trap card from your deck to your hand. A phenomenal effect, don't get me wrong. However, this has to be procced by your opponent, which does kind of hinder it. Also, it has an additional effect that you can banish this card from your graveyard, and then you can normal summon one vampire monster from your hand without tributing, which means that you can summon your curse or your lord a lot easier, which is great. If you want to, you can experiment with more copies of her, but overall, I don't think you need that many. Alright, on to the next. We have 2 copies of Vampire Retainer. I considered moving this card up to 3, just because it's a very powerful card, and keep in mind, this is my main target I sent to the graveyard off the effect of Ancient Ruler Rises. So why? Why am I playing so many copies of Vampire's Retainer? This card reads, if this card is special summoned, keep in mind, anyway, you pay 500 life points and you add a Vampire Spell Trap card from your deck to your hand. Phenomenal. The Vampire Spell Trap cards are really powerful, so getting access to them as early as possible is really strong. Also, this card reads, if this card is in your graveyard, you can send one vampire card from your hand and or face-up field to the graveyard, special summon this card, but banish it when it leaves the field. You can only use the effect of Vampire Retainer once per turn. And this is the reason why we play the Vampire package as well. You can just send any vampire card from your hand to the grave, special summon him, and then you can get the search for a spell trap card, which is, as I said, really good. However, there is something important to keep in mind. Their effect to special summon themselves is very finicky in the way that it works. Here's the thing. Let's hypothetically say that you special summoned a Vampire Retainer or a Vampire Familiar, which also has the same summoning condition as a Retainer, keep in mind. Use their effect to special summon them. If you were to use the effect of either one in the graveyard to special summon itself by sending one of these guys to the graveyard, you wouldn't be able to activate it, because if they were special summoned initially via their own effect, they then have to be banished when they leave the field. This means that you can't commit the condition of these cards to send a card to the graveyard, because they have to actively send it to the graveyard. So that's one thing I had to learn the hard way when playing this deck. So do keep that in mind. Alright, moving on. Vampire Familiar works almost exactly as Retainer, however, its effect is you can pay 500 life points to add a vampire monster from your deck to your hand. Overall, I think this is a weaker effect compared to Retainer, just because your vampire monsters, like, while great, you have access to them so easily. If I were to make a change to this deck, I might consider going from to 3 Retainer to 2 Familiar, but I felt okay doing just 2 and 1. But this is up to your discretion. Also, it's a 22 card deck, so going up to 24 is honestly not the worst thing ever, just because your skill is a Foolish Burial, so feel free to experiment. Onto the spell and trap cards for vampires. We have 1 copy of Vampire Awakening. We only play 1 because it's searchable, so we don't really need to play all that many. Also, it's a very reactive card, and it's not necessary to max out on, because if you draw this late in the duel, it kind of sucks. And because it's searchable, you can just get it whenever you need it. In case you're curious what it does, it special summons a vampire monster from your deck, but destroys it during the end phase. This would be awesome to play at more copies if Vampire Lord was able to be special summoned from the graveyard if it was destroyed by card effect by any means, but it has to be destroyed by your opponent in order to special summon itself. That's why we don't play all that many. It's a very powerful effect, but it's searchable. So next up, we have 2 copies of Vampire's Desire. Now, this is another card that I would consider bumping up to 3 if you really wanted to, but because it's searchable, we don't need to. So the effect reads, activate one of the following effects. Target 1 face-up monster you control, send 1 vampire monster from your deck to the graveyard with a different level from that monster, and if you do, the targeted monster becomes the level of the sent monster in the graveyard until the end of this turn. This effect doesn't really matter all that much. The main thing we focus on is the fact that we're able to Foolish Burial a vampire from our deck, which is really good. In most cases, you're going to be special summoning your Retainer from the graveyard, searching the Desire, activating Desire, targeting Retainer to send a Familiar to the graveyard, and then if you have another vampire in your hand, you can activate the effect of Familiar to send that to the grave and special summon it to search another monster, which gives you 2 monsters on field, which is really powerful. But onto the second effect. The second effect reads, target 1 vampire monster in your graveyard, send 1 monster you control to the grave, and if you do, special summon that targeted monster. This is the reason why we play the big guys as well. We're able to just revive them easily with the effect of a Vampire's Desire. Also, if you at any point manage to summon Spirit of the Pharaoh and summon your two vanillas, You can use these guys as tribute fodder for the effect of desire, because it only requires you to send a monster, not specifically a vampire. So this card is really good. As I said, I don't think it's a bad idea to max out on it if you really want to, but it's not necessary because it's searchable. Moving on. Now to the non-engine part of the deck. The first card up is Golden Ladybug. Now, I do want to preface that I wanted to find an alternative to Golden Ladybug because this card has an exorbitant price at the moment. I currently, if I remember correctly, last time I saw it on TCG Player, it was like a $4 card, which is ridiculous. This card really needs a reprint, like in a main core set. Not core set, but like in a box where it's guaranteed. Because I think it's only available via one of the booster packs and an OTS pack. And that's pretty much it, which is ridiculous. So why do we play Golden Ladybug? Well, let's read it. This card reads, during your standby phase, you can reveal this card from your hand and it remains revealed until the end of this turn and gain 500 life points. This deck, you're gonna be mowing through your life points like it's nothing. There's so many cards in your deck that require you to pay life points in order to activate them, and you're gonna be dwindling them really quickly. I like Golden Ladybug in this deck just because this kind of just mitigates the cost of these cards and makes it to where you're not taking yourself out while dueling. So that's why it's here. So if you don't want to spend the $4 on the Golden Ladybug, I completely get that, but here are some suggestions that you might want to try out in case in case you don't want to spend the money. So first one is Waboku. I believe this is another card that might have a higher price tag because it hasn't gotten that many reprints. So that's one. But as I said earlier in the video, the deck does interfere a lot with back row, so we have to have a lot of a back row that's very proactive instead of reactive. That's why Waboku wasn't in the deck. There's also Rainbow Life, which is another card that helps you gain life points easier, which just reads discard one card, and anytime you take damage, you just gain those life points instead. This isn't the worst card to have in your deck just because you don't mind having a lot of these cards in the graveyard. It's actually kind of a benefit if you can get them in the grave. So Rainbow Life isn't the worst option, but as I said, you're really struggling for back row space in this deck. The last card is Hollowed Life Barrier, which reads that this turn you don't take any damage from your opponent's card effects. This doesn't particularly prevent you from taking damage from your own card effects, but it does keep you alive during your opponent's turn. So it's probably the weakest one of the three, but there are options if you don't want to get the Golden Ladybug. Alright, moving on. We also have 2 copies of Foolish Burial. As I said, sending cards to the graveyard, very powerful, so we're going to be maxing out our semi-limits on the Foolish Burials. And lastly, we have 3 copies of Night Beam. If you wanted to, you could play Cosmic Cyclone, but I don't recommend it particularly because 1,000 life points is very steep, and with the amount of times you're going to be activating Retainer and Familiar, you might just end up taking yourself out before your opponent has a chance to. So Night Beam works perfectly fine in this deck. Also, it's just a really good card. Alright, and that's the main core of the deck. On to the side deck now. For the side deck, I have 3 copies of Anti-Magic Arrow. I think this card is heavily slept on and not enough people are trying it out. In case you're unfamiliar with it, it reads, at the start of the battle phase, for the rest of this turn, after this card resolves, neither player can activate spell or trap cards or their effects. Neither player can activate cards or effects in response to this card's activation. So, the whole point of this deck is that you're supposed to, once you summon the Spirit of the Pharaoh, take out your opponent right away. As I said, the Spirit of the Pharaoh is already a big monster with 2,500 attack points, so taking out your opponent is not that hard. And summoning Vampire Lord and Vampire's Curse is not that difficult at all. So you're gonna be taking games out of nowhere very quickly if you're allowed to set up your combo. And that's why I think Anti-Magic Arrows is kind of like invaluable during these situations. Preventing your opponent from activating spell or trap cards during the battle phase is very powerful, and that's why I really like it. And additionally, we have 3 copies of Book of Moon if you want to move on to a more defensive playstyle when facing your opponent. Another great option for this deck would be Straight Flush to be able to take out all your opponent's back row. Another card that I tinkered a lot with was Double Cyclone. So this card reads, target 1 spell trap card you control and 1 spell trap card your opponent controls, destroy them. Here's the thing, if you summon Spirit of the Pharaoh, you can always activate the effect of Ancient Ruler Rises to set your first Sarcophagy back to the field from wherever it is. And it kind of just gives you an infinite fodder for cards to destroy for the effect of Double Cyclone. So honestly, I don't hate this at all as a tech option, but I felt that Night Beam was a more reliable choice. But honestly, I like this card a lot. I don't think it's a bad idea if you decide to play it. Alright, and that's pretty much the deck profile for the Vampire variant of Ancient Ruler Rises. Overall, I really like this variant of the deck. It's super fun, it's very explosive, and it has a lot of very interesting nuances behind it. Feel free to let me know in the comment section below if you're willing to try out this deck or if you've tried something similar to this. Oh, one last thing before we move on to the second deck profile, and that is, give me 1 second. Okay, so I went ahead and built this deck on TCG Player, and as you can see, the total came out to $22.88. However, one thing I want to show you real quick is that this $22.88 is mostly from the shipping and handling. I went ahead and just picked up every single card from the deck, and I just got it from random vendors. If you wanted to build this deck, it's going to be a lot cheaper, actually. The real base price of the deck is $10.68, which is honestly very affordable. And the bulk of this price is coming from Golden Ladybug, as I said, $4, and that's almost half the price of the deck. So as you can see, this deck is super affordable and honestly a ton of fun if you really want to try it out. So that's one thing I wanted to show you real quick. Really consider playing it, guys. It's tons of fun because a lot of the cards come from the which set was it? The SpeedDuel box, Duels of the Shadows, which in my opinion is one of the best boxes we've gotten. So, very affordable deck. All right, on to the second one now. All right, so here we're on to the second deck profile, and as you can see, this deck is completely different from the first. Let's go ahead and dive in and explain what exactly is going on with this variant of the deck. So, first off, the first thing that becomes very, very apparent is that we are playing a lot more vanillas, and we changed up the ratios. So we're only playing 1 Servant while playing 3 copies of Protector. This is going to make a lot more sense when you look at the other cards we're playing in the deck. And of course, we're still playing the Spirit of the Pharaoh and one of each of the Sarcophagy. Also keep in mind, it's important that you play Pharaonic Protector in this variant and not Pharaoh Servant. It's the better card to play in this variant of the deck, so do keep that in mind. Because we are playing Rat Toolbox, that is the variant of the deck. Giant Rat is able to special summon another copy of itself, and/or Zombina, or Pharaonic Protector, depending on what you need during the turn. So, Giant Rat reads, when this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon 1 Earth monster with 1500 attack or less from your deck in attack position. We're playing 2 copies of Zombina because Zombina is able to target any level 4 lower monster in our graveyard and special summon it. Zombina alongside Giant Rat can create a really annoying cycle for your opponent to deal with, because if you summon Giant Rat, special summon Zombina from your deck, your opponent destroys Zombina, she can special summon Giant Rat from the graveyard, your opponent destroys Giant Rat, it can then special summon like another Rat or another Zombina from the deck. The point is, it's a really cool loop you can do with this deck, and I really like it. However, you don't need to max out on Zombina, it's because she needs something in the graveyard already in order to be able to do anything. So that's why we only played 2 of her. Next up, we have 3 copies of Sphere Mode. Next up, we have 3 copies of Sphere Karibo. This is one of my personal favorite cards in SpeedDuels, and I don't think enough people play it. The main reason we're playing Sphere is because since we're not able to play all that much back row interactions with our opponent, Sphere Karibo works as a way to keep ourselves alive during our opponent's turn by just acting as a hand trap. We don't need any back row in order to activate Sphere Karibo, so I think it works phenomenal in this variant of the deck. And that's pretty much all the monsters we're playing. Now onto the back row. First off, we're playing 1 copy of Order to Charge. This card is really powerful, and it reads, target 1 non-token monster you control. Tribute that normal monster, and if you do, destroy 1 monster your opponent controls. Because we're playing so many vanillas in our deck, this card comes up very often. Being able to tribute one of our guys to 1-for-1 with our opponent is very powerful, especially whenever you summon Spirit of the Pharaoh and special summon multiple of these guys to the field. They just become endless fodder to deal with your opponent's stuff on their field very easily. And in addition, we're also playing 2 copies of Order to Smash. This card reads, target 1 level 2 or lower non-token normal monster you control. Tribute it, and if you do, destroy up to 2 spell and trap cards your opponent controls. This is an incredibly powerful trap card that requires you to be playing a very specific version of a deck in order to make work. And it just so happens that all our vanillas are level 2 or lower. Works out perfectly for us. And being able to convert any of these guys into top 2 back rows is it's too good not to play in the main deck. So that's why we're playing this card. We're playing 2 copies of Widespread Ruin. This card reads, when your opponent monster declares an attack, destroy the 1 attack position monster your opponent controls with the highest attack. Your choice if tied. As I said, all our monsters are relatively weak, really small guys until we summon Spirit of the Pharaoh, so being able to deal with their most problematic monster on the field is really powerful. So that's why we're playing this card. After that, we're playing 1 copy of Jar of Avarice. This is one of my personal tech choices that I play in a lot of decks, and I mean a lot of them, because a lot of the decks that I personally gravitate towards are very control heavy, and Jar of Avarice tends to be a really powerful card in these decks because you're just able to essentially reset a good chunk of your deck and continue to grind out a duel. So 1 is more than enough. You don't want to play multiple this guy, and that's pretty much the main deck. Now for the side deck. Playing 3 copies of Book of Moon. Of course, you can always change your 3 of in the deck for anything you like, you prefer more. Like if you wanted to, you could play Breaker, DD Warrior Lady, etc, etc. I just happen to like Book of Moon a lot just because it's very proactive. It can work defensively. I think it's just Book of Moon is one of the best cards in the format. So that I just love playing it in whatever deck that I don't need the 3 slot in. After that, we play an additional copy of Order to Charge. Depending on what your opponent's playing, you might feel the need to up the number of Order to Charges in your deck, so that's why we play 1 on the side. Additionally, we're also playing 1 copy of Justy Break. Justy Break is very powerful. However, because decks like Gaia are in the format, this doesn't always come up as much as you like. Because this card reads, when your opponent monster declares an attack on your normal monster, destroy all monsters on the field except attack position normal monsters. So if it happens that you're facing an opponent that's playing a vanilla heavy deck, this card kind of just ends up being useless, even though it's just really strong. And finally, we're playing 1 copy of Straight Flush just to deal with back row heavy decks. And yeah, that's the deck profile. In the comment section below, let me know which one was your favorite. Are you going to be playing vanilla beatdown for Ancient Ruler Rises or the vampire version? I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts in the comment section below. But with that, that's the end of the video. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'm going to try and bring out one of these videos every single week until we cover every single skill in the format. And if you guys want to see a specific skill get covered earlier than I have planned, feel free to let me know. I'll construct a deck for it and see how it goes from there. But with that, I've been Topsy. Thank you so much for sticking by and watching it all the way to the end. And if you want to check out some of my other content, click right here to check out my Master Duel series, or click right here to check out more speed dueling content. But with that, thank you so much for stopping by and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.